What's up, guys? What is up, theory and theology? I'm not sure if I'm gonna need new earbuds. I might need to start listening back to some of my recordings. I realize when I'm listening to music, these earbuds, they're just the classic Apple earbuds with the lightning cable. They do get a little crackly sounding sometimes. So I'm wondering if when I'm recording podcast episodes, if they're getting crackly as well. I hope not, because I don't really go back and listen to too much. But I wanted to talk about a topic about spiritual practices. I was kind of talking to a friend recently, and the topic sort of came up. Like, it wasn't really like super, like, we weren't really actually talking about that, but it was like a topic within a topic that I was kind of like, okay, that's something I kind of want to touch on. Now, I kind of have this I guess this something I kind of notice where it's like, is, like, I guess, I don't know. I guess it's more of a question, but I don't know how to word it. Like, but it's related to spiritual practices, like either doing them solo or like a social version of that. And I kind of wanted to look at this week's Parsha just because I don't think I really studied the last 2 weeks. Maybe about 2 weeks ago I studied the beginning of it, and last week I don't think I studied any of it. Last week was my first week at a new job. My whole schedule, everything got so thrown out of whack. It's just like I'm still trying to like adapt to something, so and be more intentional about things. I don't really intend to completely stop recording or anything. I don't know if I'm doing it every morning. I've got family members waking up at different times now all of a sudden, so I don't really feel like I have that much space. The other day I recorded on another podcast, and I literally went out to my car before I logged on for work. And a lot of the times I'm starting at home, so that's good. And yeah, I'm just training at the job. Basically, the job is checking in on patients who are discharged from the hospital, opting them into a 30-day program to get them resources and help them out with anything that might be kind of sort of almost falling through the cracks, such as getting medical equipment, medications, things like that, appointments with doctors and everything. Okay, and that's basically the role. Meeting in person, talking on the phone, talking to providers, and closing them out with the goal of potentially keeping them out of the ER, even though if they need to go to the ER, that's fine. But trying to like address some of the barriers that leads people to relying on the ER only. So, developing a treatment plan and kind of helping with those goals in 30 days. So, let's see. Yeah, it's a lot to learn, but I'm not really here to talk about work. Um, but let me dive into this topic. So, the topic that was kind of coming up was, spiritual practices. And, I was making a comment about, how it was growing up in church. How it's like, you know, I and some other people I know, but I would study, biblical stuff because it interested me. And I would study not only biblical stuff, but primarily that was like the basis of what I would be studying. Because they would always tell you, pray, read your Bible. And I'm like, okay, let me go read my Bible. And so I'd read it, and it was just kind of interesting because I found it hard to stay motivated towards reading it because, I mean, okay, we had social groups where we could discuss topics. Um, we could discuss, our topics and, like I mentioned, we had like youth groups, Vespers groups, collegiate groups. These would go on like Friday nights, and then Saturdays we'd have Sabbath school, so there was more of a discussion there too. And then church, it wasn't really a discussion unless we had like breakout groups where we go have a little discussion, but those didn't really count because usually it would be like 5 or 6 people, and they say, okay, everybody talk for like a minute or whatever, and then usually the first people who talked would talk longer, and then if you were one of the last people trying to like give your opinion or talk or whatever, you usually didn't get a chance to say anything because we'd have to go back to the main, listening to the main points with the pastor or whatever. And then they do that. They have like different, like multiple topics where you go into your breakout group like a couple times during the service, during the sermon part. But that was very rare. That wasn't like every week. That was like on occasion. And I mean, there's still something about going to church that I kind of miss. But it's hard for me to really, it's not, it's not an easy thing for me to wrap my head around. Because I feel like it's just like a weird social environment where people, I don't know, I feel like it makes things more difficult. It makes me not as motivated. This is just my own opinion. I feel like it's kind of fluffy, maybe. Like it's not really like a deep style of learning. I mean, the social piece is there, but I don't know how much I really prefer to socialize within like a church environment because it's just so not interesting for me. It's like there's not enough variety, and the church that I kind of grew up with is like there's just not a lot of open-mindedness. So for example, even when we did used to hang out, we would usually hang out with and do the things that the most religious person was allowed to do, which was usually almost nothing. So a lot of times we couldn't go to movies, we couldn't go to anywhere where there were clubs or bars or dancing or anything. So we almost exclusively went to like boba places or walked around at the beach at night, and that's fine, but it's like to do that like every weekend, is like sometimes it's like, dude, I want to do something else. Or they'd have to be home by like 10 or whatever. They could never go out at night, like late at night. And they were just so limited. It would just make it so that like we were just so limited with the things we could do. And I don't know. I kind of get it, but I feel like there are environments where I don't think it really matters so much what type of environment you're in. You can still be a religious person. Like I've always thought, you don't have to avoid like the general public, out of fear of not being able to practice however you're practicing. It's like, I'll give one example. Like, I went to a cultural event. I think it was what was it called? It was like a Hmong New Year, and when you walk in the door, they give you a shot. And at that time, I wasn't really interested in drinking alcohol. It was a cultural thing through the religion not to really be drinking. I don't think that the Bible necessarily says don't drink. But we were kind of taught that you're not really supposed to drink, traditionally. So there was stuff like that where it's like spiritual practices where you're like practicing something that's maybe not even fully biblical, but then when you go and like interact with another culture and you're like, well, my culture does this and their culture does that, and then like denying part of their culture even though it's not like something that you're like you might be okay with not participating. I'm not saying you have to drink, but it's like culturally it might be offensive if you don't drink. And then it's like, but nobody told you that you were going to be drinking at the door. It's like, that's the entrance. They give you a shot when you walk in. And so it's like, and then they had like a dance floor and some traditional music, and they just had truckloads of like Heineken and a bunch of delicious food. And it was really fun, but it was like, the alcohol piece, and it was free alcohol. I think it was a free event, or maybe you paid, I can't remember, but maybe there was a donation. I really can't remember, but that was kind of like an example of a culture clash where it's like, there would have been nothing wrong with me taking the shot, grabbing a Heineken if somebody offered, I did get out on the dance floor for a little bit, and it's like, I was from a tradition where people said not to dance, and so it's like, okay, so what's the difference? Like, don't drink, and then I don't drink, but then they say don't dance, and then I do dance. It's like, what's the difference, And I mean, it's controversial, because alcohol, substances can be a controversy. People don't have to drink, but I'm just saying, if it's another culture where that's part of their thing, and you're in their territory at their event, for their New Year event, partying with them, why would you not want to fully, follow or try to like involve yourself in their activities? Now, I'm not Muslim. If I were Muslim and they said don't drink, it's like, okay, like Muslims within their religion, they're taught not to drink. For me, it was more like within the tradition of Adventism, we're taught not to drink, but it's not really like a thing that's like an issue. Like taking a shot at the door of an event and then eating and sitting through the event and all that. That's not, I guess they don't want you to get like tempted, like overly tempted. But that was kind of, I mean, I don't want to say I don't associate with people from churches and things, but it's just kind of like, I think being in the church environment, for me, it's personally kind of too limiting, too strict for my social life. And I kind of hate to say it this way, but it's kind of like fake. Like, people kind of judge things and judge each other a lot, and kind of like, there's almost this like, because you're living according to the most strict person's practices around you, if you don't practice those things on a regular basis, it's almost like you kind of can't be yourself. That's kind of how I felt. It was like I could never choose the events that we went to, because my, you know, interests were far more wide and variety and open-minded. It's like they probably would never go to a pride event. They probably would never go to, I don't know, like, I already mentioned bars and clubs, but say if it was like a karaoke night at a bar. I mean, and say if it's the type of bar, like a bar and grill that has food, you know, and they might not even go to something like that. And I'm just kind of like, it's like, if we're just here to sing and eat, like, you don't have to drink, you know? And I'm not even saying that, like, people were struggling with alcohol addictions or things like that. Like, I don't think that people were all that tempted by it. Maybe they were. I don't know. I never asked. But I never was really around, you know, that many people who were drinking. I think there was only one family I knew who, when I went to their family gatherings, and they would gather almost once a weekend at one of their houses, I think that was the only family I knew that regularly had like beer and stuff around. And at that time, you know, I had Adventist friends that were part of that family, and they would, some would drink. I don't know if all of them would. And that's usually where people were like offering me alcohol and stuff. And then I'd be like, oh, like, I don't know. Because at that time I was trying to like practice within the actual faith. But I wasn't really like opposed to it. I just didn't care for it. It was like, for me, it was like, what's the point of drinking? Like, I just didn't drink, you know? Just like some people I know don't drink caffeine. And it's not even like Adventist people. It's like, I have friends that don't drink caffeine, that aren't Adventists, they just don't drink it. And it's like, they don't drink caffeinated beverages, and that's just kind of their thing, you know? And these people I know, they're in San Diego, they're not even from my Adventist world. And so, you know, that's like a whole thing, you know, like, they just don't do it. It's like, everybody has things that they do and things that they don't do. I'm not saying everybody should like do everything all the time. I mean, everybody kind of figures out along the way what's best for their like lifestyle balance. But I just feel like sometimes for me, like, the church social people are, it gets to be a little bit too much. It's like, I just want to go to an event, or go out, or go to some entertainment event, go to a concert, go to a local punk show. Like, I just want to go and do stuff, you know? Like, when you're in LA, it's like, there's so much to do. Like, why limit every single aspect of where you're at and being able to hang out with people and do certain stuff? I mean, I understand to some extent. Like, I would say, when it comes to maybe social media use, internet, certain types of movies, certain types of environments, I could see how, you know, letting your energy get kind of like that kind of wired up energy, like when I go to raves, you know, afterwards, I'm wired. Like, I almost won't sleep the next night, or that night, very good. And then for the next 1 to 2 days, I'm like, you know, I'm definitely happier after having been dancing for like a really long time, and just the music cheers me up and everything. And like, so I do feel like there is something I get out of it that if I were to fully avoid it, avoid the dancing, avoid the type of music that makes you want to dance and the drumming and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's mostly electronic, but sometimes they have instruments. And avoid it because there might be profanity, and avoid it because there might be people drinking or smoking, and all those reasons why somebody who is really strict with their practices would avoid it. I wouldn't get that other experience out of it. I do think that music can create a lot of spiritual experiences, but I feel like, with, I mean, I don't know that many people from church who don't listen to secular music, but I did know a few people that I grew up with that didn't really listen to secular music at all. They were kind of at all, they didn't really want to listen to it. They only listened to gospel or contemporary Christian or any kind of religious music or instrumental music. They didn't really listen to anything else. So that was another issue where it's well, we can't go to anything that's not a Christian concert because they can't go. So, and I don't know. I still remember going to a concert where it was, what was the one they do at Angel Stadium? Harvest Crusade or whatever. Harvest Festival. And POD played there. And, I remember being so happy. And then, some of the pastors and a lot of people were, outraged by it. And I think at that time, POD was, considered a Christian group. There are a lot of groups that were considered Christian groups that kind of, stopped saying that they were. I remember when Switchfoot came out and Reliant K, they almost exclusively played Christian events. POD was one of them. Creed. I mean, there were a few groups that came out of the Christian realm that just completely denied, that that's what they were doing. Once they started getting MTV famous and stuff. And I'm really? Are you guys really saying you're not Christian? Literally, you were playing with Christian bands or at churches and praying on the stage. It's but I guess they weren't trying to be in the genre of Christianity or something. I don't really know, but that was interesting to me. And I think there was a lot of pressure. It's you can't really be a Christian band. I remember I don't know if Lamb of God is a Christian band. I know they're a metal band, and Under Oath as well. But I remember going to there was this Christian bookstore where I would buy CDs, and I remember going there, and I remember buying a Lamb of God CD. I remember buying an Under Oath CD, and it's not I understood the lyrics or anything, but I'd read through them. And I think Lamb of God just played at Sick New World Festival in Vegas last weekend or whatever. I don't really know. I'm not judging it. I'm just saying the music gets a little controversial because when I was younger and I was more in tune with what was going on in rock music, the newer stuff or new albums that would come out and stuff, I'm not really too closely paying attention like I used to, but when I used to, it was there was a lot of there were a lot of people who would a lot of bands who would just kind of be just playing and or making albums, and they were on the Christian radar. I don't know how they got there or how they got out of the stores where people were they're not Christian, or how they found their way onto the shelves and then off of the shelves. But I don't even know if that store exists anymore. I don't really know, but that is something I do remember. But yeah, I find it hard to want to go to church for social reasons or for learning reasons. It's like, and that's kind of what I was talking about, mentioning to my friend, is that, going to church, the way they read the Bible, it was kind of weird. Like, they would take like a section, like maybe 2, 3 verses. Usually it was New Testament. Usually it was like something, brief. They didn't read like usually even like a full chapter. Maybe it was like a paragraph. But they didn't do a lot of reading. There are a lot of churches that are like this. They don't really read a lot of the Bible, of what they're talking about. I'm not even going to get into the versions of Bibles that people use, but they would basically look at the Bible, put it up on the screen, and they'd read like a little bit of it, not really a whole lot of backstory, maybe some little history about it, based on like the church tradition. They could take something like Genesis, the beginning of Genesis, the creation story, or like John 1:1, or John 3:16, or like, I don't know. It would usually be common stories that people already grew up with, like Daniel, Joseph, like, the life of anything with the life of Jesus, or like feeding the 5,000, or some like healing the leper, the guy who got lowered through the ceiling, or the guy who was at the pool that would get stirred by the angel, or whatever it was. And they would go through a part of the story, maybe not even the whole story. They'd read like a portion of it and be like, oh, and he was lowered down, or whatever. And then they go tell like kind of like a what if this was the scenario about his friends who lowered him down, or the people who tried to help this guy into the pool, or whatever. But it wouldn't be from the Bible. It would be just kind of like opinions, or maybe this is what it might have looked like. And then they'd almost always jump into like, what does that mean for us today? That means that we should be the types of friends who help people if we see them struggling, or like they go into some kind of like teaching that they weren't studying the Bible anymore at this point. They weren't reading the Bible at this point. And it was kind of more like social, like, what does your week look like as a Christian? How would you apply these few verses and the general like outlook of this story to like your social life, or your work life, or your educational life, or your hobbies, or your family? Like, how would you apply it? And then they kind of get into talking about what that would look like, telling stories about their own past, where they kind of like how I was saying that whole story I just mentioned about like going to like the Hmong New Year or something. They'd tell like a story, and it's more like to get people interested. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be getting people interested, but it's like, I don't know, like they're not teaching anything. Like, they're not teaching the actual like Bible, or like they're not letting the congregation talk and speak. And the style of study and preaching is very weird. It's like taking a bit of a story, like a little bit, a snippet of it, and expecting that people are going to get interested and go read their Bible during the week and like dive into these stories and stuff. But like, they kind of tell like a version, and then you kind of get in your mind like this version of what I should be looking for in this story. Or there are the sermons where they kind of tell you, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. And it's like, okay. And then they kind of just use this kind of like method of shaming people. If you're doing this, like, I don't know, like, you need to repent and Like, I didn't really grow up in a church where people talk too much about sending people to hell and all that kind of stuff, but I mean, it's kind of like an undertone. Everyone was kind of fearful that that was something that someone would maybe think about them, that they're gonna go to hell, or whatever. And people were kind of afraid to show any kind of differences, or any kind of areas of their lives that weren't like perfect. They got a little uncomfortable with that. So I don't really know. I don't really know where people were really trying to go with that kind of thing, but I don't know. I always found it weird because, like, I'm not like better than anybody, but I'm just a nerd, and I liked to study the Bible when I was growing up. So I always found it kind of weird where it was like, okay, are we not going to talk about this? Are we not going to talk about what happens before the story, or what happened after the story, or what the historians say, or they kept it simplistic. And I feel like that kind of turned me off to things, because I was like, we're not really learning anything. You're not teaching us anything. And if I did study and then come back and ask questions, nobody would really solidly answer the questions. They would just kind of like, oh, like it's good you've been reading your Bible, and like they would kind of simplify everything to a point. Like, say if I had a question about the Nephilim, or if I had a question about all the complicated things in the Bible, like those people who turn to a pillar of salt, or like what was the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, like when the Israelites were wandering in the desert, like what was going on. People wouldn't really want to answer. They would never sit down with the Bible with you. They would never give any kind of explanation. They'd just be like, okay, like, what did you read? What did the Bible say? You should like pray on it, kind of thing. And like, they kind of just leave you to fend for yourselves. And I'm just thinking, like, I've always kind of thought this way. I'm like, any other field, if I went into my doctor with a broken leg, they'd be like, okay, this is what you need to do. We're going to examine this and see if it's broken, and like give you like some kind of advice, or like, tell you which direction to go in, or like explain to you what's going on, or like this is a fracture, that's why it's been hurting, or like this is a sprain, or like you see this x-ray, like this is what's going on, that's why you have that pain in this area. And then they kind of tell you like what they recommend for it. Now, maybe it's not always 100% right, like 110% of the time. Like, there is some speculation, and they are making decisions pretty quickly, like working pretty fast. And they're not really, I don't know. But just any other field, I feel like if you went to the professional person and kind of started talking to them about their profession, like they're the expert. And I know maybe with religion, you can't really have experts necessarily. Maybe that's what it is. But it always was kind of weird to me. I was like, okay, these people are supposed to know more than anybody else. Like, why don't they just like teach? Like, actually teach more, like, about the history of things, about how this came to be. I think where they did teach a lot would be the traditions, the religious traditions, like Ellen G. White stuff. They would teach a lot about that. But you would never really see them like teaching too much. It was more like general. It was very general, and a lot of food for thought. And sometimes it's like, I don't really know where they're going with this, and then they mostly get wrapped up in these stories, like the storytelling that was like, the application of what your week would look like between church days, between one weekend and the next. What would it look like as a Christian following this type of the snippet that was read from the Bible, what would it look like applied to your life today, and then telling at least one, if not multiple, stories about their history, their life, or the lives of other people that they witnessed or heard about, like trying to give like examples of things. And it's like, why do you need to be giving all these examples of, other people, either like an example of what to do or an example of what not to do? Like, it wasn't like, I mean, I've heard that there have been more recently kind of more of like a gossipy style of that where people are kind of calling each other out, but which is weird. But I mean, I feel like it was normally like, pastors talking about their own lives, like where they grew up or where they went to college or people that they knew, and they wouldn't give names or anything, so it wasn't like identifiable. But I have heard that people recently have said that some of the stuff might be identifiable because they're giving like too many details. It's like, oh, I once knew this couple, this interracial couple with 3 boys, and it's like, okay, well, it's those people sitting right over there, it's like, like, so it would be a little more, more detailed, but I don't know, like, I feel like yeah, that's something to, it's just something that I'm like, I don't really know what to do with that, because it's like, if you go to church every week and it's like that, but if you don't like study on your own, then it's like, what are people actually learning? Like, it does sink in, but it's like, they don't really teach people the Bible that much, I've noticed. And maybe that was just the churches I grew up in, because I did have friends who came from other churches that would go and visit, and they would be like, yeah, like, there, you don't, like, your pastor doesn't really like teach you guys anything. And I was kind of like, yeah, I know. Like, we're not really learning anything. Like, if you knew nothing, you would learn. But if you were someone who grew up around it and were there all the time and kind of more immersed, then after a while you're kind of not learning anything new. And to me, that was not interesting, because I was like, well, so I was mostly going there for the social aspects, even though it was like, I liked going to church and stuff, but church, religion, that kind of thing, like, that doesn't really make it so it's like a spiritual practice. I feel like the spiritual practice comes with what you actually do, like, in your day-to-day, what you choose to do, what you are actually participating in, or deciding, hey, this isn't going to be part of my practice. Like I mentioned before, like when I was talking about Ramadan and stuff, like, I've never had it part of my practice to be like fasting a whole lot or hardly, or to be like praying 5 times a day. Those would be things that are like, okay, this is a different type of spiritual practice than what I grew up with. I think for Adventism, the spiritual practice is mostly doing the Adventist thing. It's like the Sabbath and, not doing a lot of the stuff, like the maybe not consuming caffeine, and not, going to bars and clubs, and not buying or selling on the Sabbath, and not like, I think those would be the major ones. Then people say pray and read your Bible. I think almost every Christian denomination is going to teach you to do that, with the exception of maybe like some of the strict, like Amish. I think they're not really encouraged to read the Bible. But I was kind of thinking about it too when I was looking at part of the Parsha. It's for Parshat Kedoshim, it starts with Leviticus 19:15, and let me see. No, that's the second portion. So it actually starts before that, but I guess I started at the second portion, and it talks about not judging people uh, based on if they're rich or poor. Um, like not favoring a poor person or respecting a great person when it comes to judgment, and then not committing injustice. I mean, that would be something that is like if somebody wants to have a spiritual practice, they could maybe, you know, incorporate something like that. The one that kind of was relatable for me was, where it said like you shall not go around as a gossip monger amidst your people, and then you shall not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood. I mean, I don't think I've stood around the shedding of my fellow's blood, but I've definitely known, experienced, and probably been a part of being a gossip monger. I can say that openly because I do think it's not a good practice to gossip, but I also know that it is something, especially when you're connected in the religious world, it is something that is very hard to get away from. Like, even if you actively tell people, I don't really participate in gossip, unless you're literally walking away, like, it's going to be pretty hard. And there was another one that I thought was interesting. What was it? It was something. Uh, this one. In verse 31, it said, "You shall not turn to sorcery of Av or Yidani. You shall not seek these and thereby defile yourselves through them." I mean, I don't know why I just was interested in, like, why does it mention those specific things? I don't think that's something that people do nowadays. I've never even known of anything like that. I think in the modern Western world, a lot of people don't really practice sorcery. The Rashi kind of mentioned something about, it says, one who practices the sorcery of Av is Pithom the sorcerer. It says, see Rashi, Deuteronomy 18:11. He communes with the dead, as it were, by raising the spirit of the dead, which then speaks from his armpit. And one of the practices of sorcery of Yidani inserts the bone of a creature called Yidoah into his mouth, and the bone speaks. Now that is some whole other thing that I've never seen or heard of a practice that's like that. I'm pretty sure I've read that before, but I don't really think I ever knew what it meant, and I don't think it's something that people do in modern day. Now there are tribalist practices where I could see that people might be doing some kind of sorcery type of thing. I'm trying to think if there's like anything in the modern Western world that people practice that would be considered sorcery. Because what would be the purpose of somebody like communing with like the dead or the bones or whatever it is and having it speak? I guess you're wanting it to speak to see kind of, maybe I'm guessing, to see kind of what it says. I mean, the only thing that sounds similar to me is like a Google search or like Chat GPT. Like you're searching, you put in a search term and it spits out an answer. But this would be more so like you're asking a question to some kind of dead bones or some kind of spirit or something that's supposed to respond to you. And about what? I don't know. Is it telling you your future? I don't really know what it's. I'm not educated on this topic to a point where I can even speak about it and like explain it, but I'm just wondering, like and there was something, I guess I'll wrap up with this. So just because it mentioned gossip mongering, I did kind of look at I think Cinco de Mayo, May 5th was the last day they posted about for the Chofetz Chaim Daily, and so they're saying in that one, like, remember Chofetz Chaim is the readings that talk about kind of like gossip and social interactions and what kind of stuff you should or shouldn't say. So basically they're saying it's also, even without details, to hint towards an old fight. So even if you don't have the details, you probably shouldn't mention old fights. Or to write gossiping things, or to tell a store owner that some other person badmouthed his merchandise. So these are kind of things where it's like, to tell somebody, you're not supposed to tell somebody these things. You're not supposed to tell somebody, even without mentioning the details, you're not supposed to hint toward an old fight. So that would mean, like, say if I got in a fight, I don't get in fights with my sister really, but like, say if I got in a fight with my sister and then my brother comes around and I'm like, even without the details, it's like, oh, she might still be mad at me kind of thing. If she just walks past and doesn't say anything and just walks out the door without any conversation or like acknowledging, and I'll be like, oh, she's not acknowledging me, that might mean something, and then my brother might not have known that maybe me and my sister had a fight. This is like a weird thing to even talk about because me and my siblings don't fight like that, but I mean, it's completely made up. Or to write, they say write reckless, or to tell store owner that someone else badmouthed their merchandise. So if my cousin owns a store, and then one of my friends goes into the store and is like, oh, like, I bought this thing and it was super cheap and it broke right away, and like, I noticed when I went on your cousin's store website, all the stuff on there is like cheap quality, and then I go back and tell my cousin, like, yeah, like, someone I know who shopped at your store said that you only sell like cheap stuff, like cheap quality stuff, you're kind of ripping people off kind of thing. I mean, that kind of stuff is hurtful, so it makes sense. There's a bunch of stuff here that I don't understand what it means. It says also to say reckless to an individual and worse in public. So there's certain stuff you're not supposed to say to a person, and it's worse to say it to them in public. I don't know what avak means. Avak reckless is also aser. I don't know what avak means. When talking about Plony to either an overly sensitive person or someone who doesn't like him, one must not say anything that they'll misunderstand as an offensive comment. So, if I'm mentioning something about my next door neighbor to an overly sensitive person, or to someone who doesn't like my neighbor, then the way that I talk about that person needs to be, making sure that they don't misunderstand. They don't misunderstand it as me gossiping about them, and that kind of happens. I'd say, like, if you have friends that kind of don't get along, or they're having some contentious kind of situation lately, it is kind of common that people would want to go and not like badmouth them, but when you're talking to someone that doesn't like someone else, usually it's kind of like, if you're just in private talking to them, it is easier, or common, maybe not easier, but it's common to be like a little bit like almost taking the side of the person that you're currently talking to. Because if you like both people and they're both fighting, Bob is fighting with Susan, and then you go over to Bob after you just were hanging out with Susan. Maybe you just finished having coffee with Susan, and then you go over to Bob's house for, to watch a movie or something. And then you're like, yeah, I was just with Susan. And then you kind of know that Bob is like a little hurt by Susan, and you're just kind of like, yeah, kind of like she was, like, if he's like, oh, how's she doing? And just being like, oh, like I guess she's all right. I don't really know. She doesn't really seem like she's like things are going well for her. Like, saying something like that is kind of like, yeah, you're kind of bad mouthing her, almost in favor of Bob, because Bob kind of knows that he's kind of upset with her, and so making it sound like, you're pointing towards something negative about Susan just to almost side with Bob, or just to get on Bob's good side, or even doing the opposite when you're meeting up with Susan and being like, oh, like, I'm gonna meet up with Bob later, you know, and then something, a little negative undertone might come out, even if you totally like both people. But when you hang out with people, I think when any of us hangs out with people, um, we kind of know the good and the bad, and so it's not uncommon to be like, maybe almost wanting to mention something negative, which I don't know what that would be, but and that's why I don't like it when you meet someone, like someone brand new that knows your friends, but you don't know that person, and then they're like, oh, I've heard so much about you, and it's like, oh gosh, like, what have people been saying, what I mean? It's like, that's always like the most awkward thing when people say something like that. But even something like that, someone could take on as a spiritual practice. I'm not saying that anybody has to do any of this. I'm just saying, I think a lot of times we're not really taught about what a spiritual practice looks like, or like anything. And like, a lot of people who grew up religious, grew up with like the traditions of the religion or the denomination they're from. But it's like, you can take on stuff like fasting, prayer, trying to study what Chavetz Chaim says, and try not to do all the gossiping, or avoiding certain stuff, or starting to do certain stuff that it mentions in Leviticus or whatever. I'm not saying people need to do that, but I think sometimes it's, I don't know if fun is the right word, but like, it is a little way to kind of like spice up, spice up, you know, a practice, and you don't have to even tell anybody about it, but like, just to try to do something new. That's kind of what I'm learning is like, trying these different things, trying them out sometimes is like a little fun. It can be a little bit fun. Not always, but it can be a little bit fun. So, that's something that I've kind of just come to know. Because for a while, I was kind of like, man, like, all the spirituality stuff is like I don't really know what to think. There's that difference between religion and spirituality. Um, I think the spirituality aspect is kind of more what you do by yourself. I don't think you can have really like a religious practice without other people being involved with it, because there is that kind of like you need that religion, that group of the other people in the religion to be kind of like bouncing things off each other, and everybody's like saying, oh, we need to practice it this way and trying to specifically follow that. But I feel like what you do when you're alone, that's the spiritual aspect of it, because it's not really being shared with other people. Other people might notice you doing it, depending what it is, but I mean, like, it's not really being shared with other people. No one else is involved with it. It's just, you trying to do something, if you believe in God, or for whatever reason, for your own healing and lifestyle balance, and, you can develop your own kind of practice around things. And it's not really always based in like what a specific religion says to do or not to do based on their traditions. It might be, but it doesn't have to be. And you're not like doing it in the public of other people to be like, oh, like I saw you reject that alcohol, or I saw you, you know, avoid that thing, like so that other people can like notice. It's more like you're just doing it as part of your own lifestyle, even if it's a temporary thing you're taking on. That's kind of my take on things. It's 7:45. I've got like 45 minutes to cook breakfast and log on to work, so I gotta get going. But I don't know. I didn't really have like a very